So this is the pattern we made. It's made out of a piece of corrugating medium. It was really important for these two handles to line up when we fold it in half so that they would line up when we flip our halves around, as you'll see later. The size is exactly the same size as these stupid plastic bags you get at the dollar store, the grocery store, whatever. I just cut it off at the top, ripped the sides and the bottom, and kind of traced it out on here. I've adjusted it a little bit because we've modified the design a couple times, but your basic design is going to look like this. It looks like one of those old man t-shirts that you see your grandpa wore. The width of the bag is 19 inches across. The height is 14.5 inches. These little corners here, I call them shoulders. These two shoulders here are 1 3/4 of an inch in from the edge. I radiused my corners. You probably should too. You can sew a 90-degree inside corner, but it always looks really weird, I think. I don't think it lays right. You got a better shot at getting a nice clean seam on that. The handles themselves are 3 inches wide on both sides. They're both 3 inches wide. This distance in the center is unimportant. As long as you have 1 3/4 inch inset on the shoulder here and a 3-inch handle, this will end up being the correct size. Now there's two options for the length of the handle. One option is to make it exactly like the grocery bags, and this handle length then would be 7 3/4 inches long. I've experimented with different lengths, but 7 3/4 inches long seems to be about the right length. If you want to make the tote style bag, your handles are going to be 11 inches long. This would be your grocery style handle. It looks just like the plastic grocery bags you get at the market. This bag's in dire need of cleaning. It's actually on its way to the laundry right now. Now this style of bag is more like a tote bag. You can see that the handles, rather than going across front to back, they go on the same side. This is good if you're carrying books or you just like that tote bag style. So if you're interested in making this style of bag, you're going to want to use the 11-inch length for the handles. That'll come out just fine for you. Both bags work great. Both will work for the groceries exactly the same. It just matters on how you like to hold these. I like the other ones. It seems like they pull in better. Although a tote bag has been around forever and it has a nice look to it. Okay, so we've got our fabric cut out. We have two different pieces of fabric here, two different styles. This white checkerboard stuff's going to go inside the bag, and this kind of flashy gray stuff's going to go on the outside of the bag. So it's going to look pretty cool. Now if you were to just sew it up right now, the bag would turn out to be inside out. So what we're going to have to do is a little bit of facing work. And you're going to have to do this, but it's real easy to do. So the first thing to know is that there are two sides to the fabric. There's the right side and the wrong side. If you look at this, this is the back side. The pattern on here isn't as pronounced. The pattern looks better on the outside. So we're going to call the side of the fabric that looks really nice the right side, and we'll call the back, what I would consider the back, the part that would be on the inside of the garment, we'll call that the wrong side. So we're going to take our bag pieces here that we cut out off of our template, and we're going to reverse them because right now they're right side out. Now if you were clever and you took your time and put these together so you were cutting them out with the right sides together, that would have been a step that would save you some work at this point. So there we go. We're taking the pretty sides and putting them together. So that's what they mean by when the right side together, wrong side together. So this is the right side going together. I've got the right sides put together. You can see that the pretty side of the print is actually going to be facing the other pretty side of the print. So there's two pieces. Now we're doing this because we're going to sew down the sides on either side of this inner bag set. We're going to do the same thing with the outer bag set, and again what we're going to have to do, let's move this out of our way. We'll get back to it here in a minute when we sew it up. We've got to do the same thing with our outside of our bags. Sometimes you'll find that your fabric looks exactly the same inside as it does on the outside. Since both sides of the fabric are the same, we really just have two right sides, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it together as close as I can, and we're going to sew up these outside edges. So you might be noticing that this doesn't look like the sewing machine I normally use. Normally I use Grandma, my antique singer that belonged to my mother and my grandmother. I'm not using that today. I'm going to use this guy. This is a Brother SE425. You might have seen this machine before in our embroidering videos. I took the XY table off of it, and I've got just the sleeve arm on here. And I'm using this to sew a little bit. Not that there's anything wrong with Grandma, but I just thought it would be interesting to use this sewing machine. This thing is fast. It's way fast. It doesn't have the heart and soul of that old metal machine, but I really like this machine. It's a nice machine, so it does a very good job. So what we've done is after everything's pressed out, we put pins in. Pin down the sides. We've just pinned the left and the right side. So we're going to have basically a tube with ears on top. A 4-eared tube. So let's sew that. Okay, so now we've got our two bag halves are sewed just down this long seam here on this side. They're just sewed on either side like that. Both sets are. Now on my bag, this is going to be the inside of the bag lining. I kind of like this little checkerboard pattern. And the outside is going to be this upholstery fabric. Okay, so in order to make this bag work, where I want this really funky gray fabric on the outside of my bag, and I want this kind of sedate checkerboard fabric on the inside of my bag, the way to make this happen is we have to think about it. Now when we sew it, we want to sew it with the seam on the wrong side of our fabric. So we'll want to sew it from this side. But I'm going to want both of these faces, the right sides, to meet together. So what we have to do is you turn the bag that's going to be the outside part of the bag, just turn it inside out. So you have your correct side is on the outside. Your side you want to have on the outside of the bag will be on the outside. And the wrong side is inside of the bag. That's only for the fabric that goes on the outside of the bag. Now the inside, the lining of the bag, we're going to leave it as it is. It should be still in the correct side in or wrong side out, where you can see the seams on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the lining around the outside of the bag. So our outside of the bag, I'm going to stuff it inside of the lining and get it lined up. This is the part where you can really get confused. I mean, you know, geez, does this go in that? Does that go in this? The way to remember it is when you are sewing it, you want to be sewing from the wrong side. You don't want to see the right side underneath the foot of your sewing machine. And what if you have the right side facing in, then you want it to face up against the right side on your other bag. So they go together thusly. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to sew this area here between the handles. On either side of each handle you want to sew that area through. Do not sew the handles shut yet. We'll do that later, so we're going to leave that open. Okay, now we've sewn down through these gullies and we have what look like handles. You can see how the bag's coming together. If you're putting together a grocery bag, it's going to look like this. If you're putting together a tote bag, it would look like that. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to turn everything right side out. So we're going to take the inside out of the outside. Okay, that part's pretty easy. The fun part now is trying to figure out where the handles are. So you're going to have to go inside and kind of push them up through. I use a drumstick to push them all the way out, or a chopstick. Drumsticks are longer and they're sturdier and they work really good on longer handles. There you go. So you're going to want to pull all of those through. And you can put the lining down inside whenever you want to. I don't do it yet because I'm still looking for handles. And it just makes it harder to find them. It's a lot easier if the only thing inside of there is the handle. You can pull it right up. So go around and pop these rascals out. I think this is a good color combination for this bag. You can also see how if we had gone the other direction, any other way, putting this together, it would have been a white bag with a gray inside. Put your finger down in there, shove it all around your finger, and then just pop your finger out. Okay, so we've got the handles. Let's put the lining down inside of it. That's starting to look like a bag. If you could sew it right now if you wanted to, but it'd be kind of weird. The seam's crazy. It's folding around. So we're going to take an iron, we're going to press it down, get this edge as clean as we can with just the gray showing on the outside and the white showing on the inside. It's kind of a pain in the neck, but that sort of detail really shows up in the end and adds up to an overall effect of a quality bag. Okay, so I've pressed it and I've pinned it, and I like the way my edges look. I'm okay with that. I mean, it's just a bag, right? But I like the way they look. So the next step is to lay it out and sew it. And there's something to think about. I don't know what color you're going to use. Usually I just throw some white thread on it and I don't care, but I'm going to make this one a little more interesting. So I've got this gray thread. It's a dark gray thread I found in one of the thread totes we've got. Left over from some long gone project, no doubt. So we're going to use that, and that should make it kind of look interesting. Alright, so now that everything's pinned, we've got the sewing machine set back up. Let's just sew around the outside openings again. Don't sew across the end of the handles. We're going to trim those up and get everything squared away on those in a little bit. But for right now, what we're going to do is just put a top stitch on around this edge. One of the most annoying things that I run into on these bags is if you get a bunch, like in the corner right here. It's overlapped, it's bunched up because the fabric was cut just a little bit differently, so I end up with a weird bunch. It won't be that big a deal in the end product on the bag, but it's one of those things that kind of looks crappy. So I hate it when it happens. Try and sneak through those corners, but it does happen. So if it happens on your bag, it's just a bag, man. Don't worry about it too much. Okay, now it's sewed up. It's kind of starting to look like a bag a little bit. It's got everything it needs except for a bottom. There's no bottom in this bag. So what we need to do now is turn the whole thing inside out. We want to see that beautiful liner fabric you picked out. We're going to put that on the outside. So you want to pull that out, sort of get everything whooped around here so it's kind of lined up. It's going to be super important that this fabric lays out the way it's lined up, the way it's supposed to. Just so you don't have anything weird happening with your bag later. I mean, you get those bunches up in the corners up there like we talked about. You can get them up down here. You can see I've got a really gnarly bunch right there. These look reasonably okay. I'm okay with them, I guess. Now what we're going to do with this part, and this is the really easy part, this is going to create the gussets. Make sure you have your seams, make sure you have your seams lined up here at the sides so you don't have the bag twisted. One half's twisted around the other half. And what I like to do is take about 2 fingers. So if you don't have fingers this size, find somebody who does. No, it's about it's about 1.5 inches. Just fold it over like that and pin it. That's going to be our gusset. You want a long pin. I can't use that little stumpy pin. And then once you get that pinned down, do the same thing on the other side. Ow! Don't poke yourself. So you punch that over, pin it out. Then what we're going to do, there's a couple ways you can do this. The way I was taught as a kid is you want to sew a zigzag across that because it'll give you 2 different points on it. You can do that. You can sew a couple different zigzag stitches across this bottom. And what we're going to do is we're just going to seal it up. Then when you open the bag up, it's going to have gussets in the side that'll open it up. If you want your gussets to open the bag wider, just make this part overlap a little further and the bag will belly out more. This is reasonably good for groceries. It doesn't feel like there's too much stress on any of the seams, and it's fairly reasonably shaped at the bottom. We're going to do a couple of passes across it. You can use a zigzag stitch, straight stitch. I haven't found a whole lot of difference for it. One thing that I am going to do is once I get my seam put down on here, I'm going to come back, trim it off, and hit it with an overlock stitch just to make the edge look nicer. And you don't have to do that. It's just something I like to do. Okay, there we go. We've got our little zigzag stitch across there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim up that edge as best I can to make it as clean as I can. Right there, if you take a look at it, that is my overcast stitch. I had to put a different foot on my sewing machine to get it to do it, but it does a nice job and it keeps it from filling up your bag later with all these loose threads. So we're going to turn the bag back right side out. As you turn it right side back out, these corners will be kind of hunkered in, and that's cool because that's the gusset we just created by pinching it up inside. But it's starting to look like a real bag. One thing I wanted to point out is if your dimensions when you cut it out, if you got it a little bit off and there's a little bit of overhang, not a problem. Just shore those up nice and smooth, nice and clean. Make sure everything, you know, that they have just one surface presented for our next operation. So let's go ahead and trim these off, make them kind of clean. You know, the thing about making bags and stuff like this is it's pretty forgiving. It's not like this has to fit somebody. It's not like you're making something that's going to change the world. I mean, I suppose it does in some small way. It probably changes the world, but if the bag is a little bit hinky and it's your first bag, but you can still get your groceries from the Piggly Wiggly up to your humble abode, I think it's a successful bag then, my friend. Alright, so these are, all I'm doing is I'm taking it down to the tallest part of the shortest fabric. Because we're going to sew these rascals up. We're going to make our handles. Now I'm going to show you two ways to do it. And it's pretty simple. Whether you want to do the grocery style bag or you want to do the tote style bag, either one of them can be done from this position. Now if we're doing the grocery style bag, let's get the sewing machine out of the way for a sec. If you're doing the grocery style bag, then it's pretty easy. You just go front to back, bang. And then we'll sew them up that way, and then that gives you your bag handles. You know, like that. If you want to make a tote style bag, that's pretty easy too. You just go side to side like that, and then that'll give you, and we'll cook them under, and you'll have tote handles. So you could pick it up where both of them on the front are tied together, or you can put it where front to back. And I think I'm going to do this one front to back so that these guys feel like they are a grocery bag. They hang up better at the grocery store. So in order to do this, here's what we got to do. We've got to flip this rascal back around yet again. Do it inside out. And the reason for that is it's so much easier to sew it with the straps just laying down on one another. I mean, you don't even really have to pin this. You're just going to put them as close as you can together and sew a stitch across there. It's going to stitch them together. This is a really simple operation. I mean, it looks much more complicated than it is. Like most sewing things, it can be pretty intimidating, especially for guys. We don't really sew a whole lot, so whenever we get into a situation where we can sew, we tend to overthink it and kind of outsmart ourselves. And I don't know, I found that with an iron and a little bit of patience, you can fix a lot of stuff. Now I've gone back. I'm not on that weird stitch I was on earlier. I've actually gone back to just a straight stitch. We're going to straight stitch these on both sides, and that doesn't give it a whole lot of strength as far as where it's going to be pulled apart, but what it does do is it creates the tabs underneath for our seam allowance, and we're going to fold that back, and that's going to be where we're going to pick up our actual strength. Once you get it set up where you want it, shoot that stitch across there. So there's one. You can see it's just a little butt stitch, basically. Butt stitch. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Don't worry, this is something that used to freak me out. You see how you've got a little bit of bag showing underneath there? They aren't quite exactly the perfectly same width. That's cool. We're going to fix that. I got an angle. No, I messed around with it. I used to just sew them very quick, fold over, and it didn't look as good. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn them underneath one another, and we're going to turn half of it under, or a quarter of it under on one side and a quarter of it on the other side, and that should give us a very nice finished edge for our little handles. Alright, that looks really good. This is a good time to trim up any loose strings or debris you have on there. Okay, it looks like I had a little tiny bird nest starting. Okay, got some strings over here. And you could trim these later, or you could even leave them hang. I mean, it's your bag. Do what you want to do. Don't let me tell you how to make a bag. Okay, Now you might have noticed that I'm still sewing inside with the gray thread that I had on for the outside. I could rethread my white thread, but at this point I think it's going to look better if we just do it this way. So turn the bag right side out. And technically now it really does look like a bag. I mean, there you go. There's in essence a bag, but these don't look very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it, fold it in 1/4 of the way on one side, fold it in 1/4 of the way on the other side, iron it down, pin it, and we'll sew probably 3-4 inches off on either side. 4 strips, one on the outside edge, one on the inside edge, and that should make this bag very much a nice handle. I wouldn't go out much further than maybe 3 or 4 fingers on either side, otherwise it starts to cramp up on already cramped bottom of the bag. So you want it to be kind of gusseted out a little bit, belly down on the handle. Now the way I used to do it was I'd just fold it in half, bang, there you go. There you go, there's your handle. And you can do that, but I don't like it as much. I mean, it looks kind of hinky. You end up with this weird area. So what I'm doing these days is I fold 1/4 under, fold 1/4 under, iron it, pin it, and then sew it. And it should be pretty good. And since I'm using a colored thread, I've got to make sure I sew my top stitch on the outside of the bag. It would be a lot easier to sew from the inside, but I've got to do it the other way. Unless I decide, oh, I just don't care, or I wind some of this onto a bobbin. And I may do that. I may just throw some up on a bobbin. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is fold this seam down flat. Just iron it down, press it down flat. We're going to keep that pressed. Then we're going to fold these in 1/4 of the way so that they meet in the center, and they'll create a nice little handle, and any overlaps we have won't show. So your handle will be about that wide. As I indicated, we were going to fold this over, press it, and we're going to sew it back together. You can see that I've turned the bag inside out. It just makes it easier for me to sew. The key on this part is to pick a point where you're going to start and pick a point where you're going to stop. And we're going to put one down along the edge to keep the edge nice and crisp, and then one down along one of each of these seams, and that will define our bag. It'll have 4 stitches on the top. Shouldn't look bad. Should look okay and give you a little bit of extra grip. So what I've done with these first two is I put a stitch down the center. Shows up on here as a stitch down the center. Now I'm going to put one down the edges to keep that edge crisp, and we'll go work on the other side. Ain't rocket science, man. We're just making bags. Okay, now trim off your weird looking threads. Take a look at your handiwork. If you have to fix something, right now is the best time to fix it, right after you do it. So every operation, every stitch you make, you should probably be looking at it and seeing if you did something wrong, and if you did, can you live with it? Like I said, these are just bags, man. Just bags. It's not like you're sewing patches on a leather vest, right? This is the bag. Sew it up. You can see the bottom seam looks nice. You should have gussets that look like that. They work pretty good. The handles. I just ran some stitches down the handles. Doesn't have to be precise. Just something down there so when you grab it, it's got a nice, hard, rigid handle that can't slip out of your hand. And that gives it a little bit of belly, but it still hangs pretty nicely. It's a nice looking bag. I like the outside, I like the inside. The outside looks kind of fancy. The inside looks kind of intimate. Anyway, that's it. That's how hard it is to make a bag. I mean, for Pete's sakes. Anybody could do that. I can do it. You could do it. It's just a few steps you got to follow. Got to have it in the right order and take your time. Because, hey man, you deserve a good looking bag, right? And the cool thing is, when you take these to the market, there's so many people that'll ask you, where in the heck did you get such a fancy bag? And you can tell them, hey, I made that. And if you're a guy, I invariably get an eyebrow with some very skeptical looking clerk asking me, are you sure you made that? It's like, yeah, I made that. So now you can make them too. Enjoy these things, and I'd love to see the bags you make. So far out. Peace. Right on.